Since mom and dad are going to live here for a while, why don't you rent an apartment somewhere and stay there? Hearing those words from my husband, Kevin, my thoughts froze for a moment. It felt as if someone had pressed a pause button on the world. I blinked, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me it was a joke. But his face remained stony, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture I didn't recognize. Beside him, my father-in-law, Robert, and mother-in-law, Patricia, wore faint smiles. They weren't just neutral, they were utterly devoid of even a trace of apology. Patricia tilted her head, as if she were explaining something simple to a slow child. "I'm sorry, Hillary," my mother-in-law said, standing in the entryway of my home. "It's only until we save up enough to buy a house. You understand, don't you? Family helps family." I could do nothing but stare in stunned silence. The key to my own front door felt cold and useless in my pocket. They had changed the locks. My home, the place I had bought with my own savings, the garden I had planted with my own hands, it was now being held hostage. Half a year earlier, my life had looked very different. My career as an international management consultant was reaching its very peak. I was appointed project lead for a massive corporate turnaround plan at a Paris-based global fashion conglomerate, Maison de Rêve. It was one of those dream assignments everyone envied. Months of on-site research across Europe, grueling negotiations with Italian suppliers, and high-stakes presentations to the French board. On the morning of my departure, I was filled with hope and a quiet sadness at having to part from the man I loved. Kevin had always been my biggest cheerleader. As I zipped my suitcase, he came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "I took a peek at your presentation materials last night," he whispered. "They were flawless. That revenue forecast graph was incredibly persuasive." "That's my wife." I leaned back into his embrace. "You're not supposed to look at confidential work documents." He laughed, kissing my temple. "I'm your husband. What's yours is mine, right?" At the time, I thought it was romantic. I didn't hear the subtle possessiveness lurking beneath the sweetness. "My friends are always saying how lucky I am," he continued. "A brilliant and beautiful wife? Talking about you in front of them is my greatest pride. I'll miss you, Hillary, but this is for your success. I'm truly proud of you." I drew great emotional strength from his support. As he stood beside my packed suitcase, he seemed to remember something and added casually, "Oh, by the way, my parents said they wanted to come visit. They were hoping to see you too, but the timing didn't work out before your departure. They were really disappointed." "Well, that's a shame," I replied, genuinely meaning it. "You'll be lonely by yourself while I'm gone. Please tell them they're welcome anytime. I hope they'll stay and relax." I had no idea those words would mark the beginning of a nightmare. Work in Europe was brutal, but exhilarating. I was leading a team of 12 consultants from 4 different countries. We were tasked with restructuring the entire supply chain of a luxury brand that was hemorrhaging money. The hours were punishing, often 16-hour days, fueled by espresso and adrenaline. At first, Kevin and I video called every night. He would show me the empty house, blow kisses at the camera, and tell me he missed me. But as the project entered its most critical phase, the week of the final board presentation, our contact gradually dwindled. I told myself he must be busy too. He worked in real estate, a job that often required evening showings and weekend open houses. I threw myself completely into my work, ignoring the small, nagging voice in my head that said something was wrong. 2 months into my assignment, my phone rang late one night. It was almost midnight in Paris, which meant it was early evening back home. I was exhausted, having just finished a heated negotiation with a logistics union representative. The caller ID read, Lucy. Lucy was my best friend. We had met in college during a particularly brutal statistics class. While others had crumbled under the pressure, Lucy was the only one who noticed I was struggling. When I had nearly been crushed by pressure and loneliness during a previous job, when even Kevin had brushed off my anxiety with an optimistic, "Just relax, honey," Lucy had driven 2 hours to my apartment just to sit with me and listen. Since then, she had become an irreplaceable emotional anchor in my life. If she was calling this late, it wasn't for a casual chat. Her voice on the other end of the line was unusually grave. "Hillary, I'm sorry to call you at this hour, but there's something I absolutely have to tell you." I sat up in my hotel bed, my heart rate quickening. "What is it? Did something happen? Please stay calm." She took a deep breath. "Kevin's parents have been living in your house ever since the day you left for Europe." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, living?" I said they could visit. "I know, but they moved in, Hillary. They brought furniture. His dad painted your living room walls a disgusting shade of beige without asking. And that's not all." Her voice trembled with barely suppressed anger. "For about the past month, every weekend, your house has basically turned into a neighborhood social club." What Lucy described went far beyond anything I could have imagined. Apparently, the previous weekend had been the worst. Until 2 in the morning, blaring 80s rock music echoed through the neighborhood. Journey, Bon Jovi, and Def Leppard at maximum volume, accompanied by the drunken shouting of partygoers. The next morning, the lawn I had lovingly cared for was littered with pizza boxes, empty beer cans, and cigarette butts. "The antique rose garden," Lucy said, her voice cracking. "The one you always said was your treasure. It's been completely trampled by drunk guests. There's nothing left of it, just mud and broken stems." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "The leftover trash from their barbecues wasn't even sorted," Lucy continued. "They just left it out on the curb in ripped bags. It's attracting crows and raccoons. The smell is horrible." Mrs. Patterson from across the street called the homeowners association twice. "And your in-laws? They're going around shamelessly saying, 'This is our son's house, so we can use it however we like.'" I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "What about Kevin? Have you talked to Kevin?" I tried. I talked to him so many times. He just told me I was being too sensitive, like I was the bad guy. Lucy let out a bitter laugh. He said, "Lucy, you need to mind your own business. My parents are just enjoying their retirement. I really hated having to tell you this, but I couldn't stand watching your home be destroyed while you're away anymore." As soon as we hung up, I called Kevin. The ringing sounded unbearably long and hollow as it echoed through my hotel room. After 7 rings, the call finally connected. But instead of the warm voice of the husband I had been longing to hear, I was met with an irritated low tone, as if he'd picked up an unwanted sales call. "Hello, Hillary, I'm busy right now." "Kevin, I need to talk to you." Lucy called me. She said the house is in terrible shape. I rushed through everything Lucy had told me. The destroyed yard, the beige walls, the flood of complaints from the neighbors. My voice trembled with anger and anxiety, but on the other end of the line, there was silence. Cold, heavy silence. After several seconds, he let out a long, weary sigh. "Oh, that. Lucy's exaggerating. Doesn't she stick her nose into other people's business a bit too much? I mean, my parents are just enjoying themselves with a few friends. I've been lonely while you're gone, too, you know. Having them around really helps me out." "Just enjoying themselves?" I nearly shouted. "Kevin, they trampled my rose garden. They changed the lock?" Lucy mentioned they changed the locks. "Is that true?" He scoffed. "Changed the locks for security. There have been break-ins in the area. We didn't want your valuables stolen." "I am a valuable, and I can't get into my own house." All right. His voice dripped with impatience. "I get it, you're upset. But I've got an important dinner with a client right now. A real estate deal worth $40,000 in commission. I don't want to waste time on something so trivial. We'll talk later." Beep, beep, beep. The call was cut off unilaterally. I stood there frozen in place, my fingers clenched tightly around my smartphone. The anger passed quickly, replaced by a sensation as if all the strength were draining from my body. I felt hollow, empty, like a puppet with its strings cut. After that, I tried calling him again and again. He never picked up. The line went straight to voicemail every time. I sent text after text. "Kevin, please. We need to talk about the house. I'm begging you. Just call me back. Why are you ignoring me?" My messages were marked as read almost immediately, those cruel little gray checks turning blue. But no reply ever came. Why? I thought, staring at the ceiling of my hotel room at 2 in the morning. Why would Kevin, the man who used to whisper that he loved me, treat me like this? As my thoughts spiraled in confusion, one explanation surfaced. It's not his decision. It has to be his parent. Patricia had always been controlling. Robert had always enabled her. They must have poisoned his mind, speaking badly about me, manipulating him behind the scenes. They probably told him I was abandoning him for my career. They probably fed his insecurities about my salary. I made 3 times what he did. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how the gentle, loving man I knew could behave like this. He's not a monster, I told myself. He's just trapped. That lie kept me warm for another week. The next day, I couldn't put my phone down, even while working. I kept waiting for a message from Kevin, some sign of remorse, some apology. But the merciless silence finally made me understand. This was his clear rejection. Whether he was being controlled or had chosen to betray me himself, I no longer had the luxury of waiting. That evening, after the Paris office had emptied out, I called my trusted supervisor, James Whitmore. James was a senior partner, a gray-haired man in his 60s who had seen it all. He had mentored me for years, and more importantly, he trusted my judgment. "There's been a family emergency," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I'm very sorry, but I need to return to the United States immediately. I don't know for how long." Sensing the gravity in my voice, he replied without hesitation. "I can tell just from hearing you that this isn't something minor. You can explain the details later. Don't worry about the project. I'll handle the team and give them proper instructions." Focus on yourself. Go home. Back in my hotel room, I stuffed my belongings into my suitcase like a madwoman. Clothes, documents, my laptop, my toiletries, everything went in without folding or organizing. I boarded the earliest flight I could arrange that very night, a red-eye to JFK with a connecting flight to my hometown. In the taxi to the airport, my mind grew eerily calm. It was the calm of survival, the calm that comes when adrenaline fades and logic takes over. I began preparing for the worst. I took out my phone and made an international call to a lawyer named Margaret Chen. She had previously helped me with the property contract for my house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch and a fenced garden. Margaret was sharp, ruthless, and utterly unafraid of confrontation. I briefly explained the situation. They've changed the locks, Margaret. They're living in my house. My husband is refusing to let me. There was a pause on her end. Then Margaret's voice, cool and precise. Do you have the deed? Yes. In a safe deposit box at the bank. Good. I'll prepare a certified copy for you. And Hillary, she added, do not engage with them alone. Do you understand me? Get the documents, then call the police before you even knock on the door. I understand. One more thing, Margaret said. Are you sure you want to do this? Divorce is a long, ugly road. Once the police are involved, there's no going back. I looked out the taxi window at the lights of Paris fading behind me. I'm sure. The following afternoon, after landing at my local airport and clearing customs, the first place I went was not my home. It was Margaret Chen's office downtown. She handed me a clear plastic folder containing the certified copy of the deed, along with a printout of the property tax records showing my name as the sole owner. Remember, Margaret said, you are the legal owner. That is a fact. Facts are your weapon. I thanked her, got back in a taxi, and headed toward the house I knew so well. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, my heart sank so low I thought it might fall out of my body. The garden was a war zone. The lawn was patchy and brown, crisscrossed with tire tracks from someone having parked on the grass. The antique rose bushes I had nurtured for 5 years were gone, just jagged stems sticking out of the mud. The fence was marred with ugly stains, barbecue sauce, maybe, or red wine. A torn inflatable pool lay deflated in the side yard. Everything Lucy had told me was true, and it was so much worse in person. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the front path and inserted my key into the front door. It wouldn't go in. No matter how many times I tried, all I felt was the cold, unyielding resistance of metal hitting metal. The lock had been replaced, not just rekeyed, but replaced with a completely different brand. A shiny new deadbolt gleamed back at me, mocking me. That was when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Hillary, you're back already. I turned around. Kevin was standing on the sidewalk with his parents, grocery bags hanging from both hands. They must have been to Costco. I could see the bulk-sized boxes of chips and a case of beer. There was no surprise on Kevin's face, no guilt, no joy at seeing his wife for the first time in months, just a cold, flat expression, as if an inconvenience had returned. Kevin, my voice came out surprisingly steady. Why has the lock been changed? Oh, that. He shifted the grocery bags. I changed it. Mom and Dad are going to be living here for a while, like I said on the phone. My mind went blank. For a while? What does that mean? They've been here for 2 months already. He frowned in obvious annoyance. Exactly what it sounds like. It'll take time for them to save up enough money to buy a new house. Their credit isn't great, you know that. Until then, they'll live here. So, you can rent an apartment somewhere and stay there for now. Simple, right? An apartment. I was speechless, unable to believe what I was hearing. At that moment, my mother-in-law, Patricia, stepped forward. She was wearing a pitying smile, the kind you give a child who has asked a stupid question. I'm sorry, Hillary, but a successful career woman like you should have no trouble finding an apartment or two, right? Robert, my father-in-law, nodded in agreement. That's right. And you earn way more than we do anyway. Rent shouldn't even make a dent for you. We're on a fixed income, you know. Their words looked down on me. They mocked my efforts and my success, reducing years of hard work to a convenient source of money for them to spend. I heard something snap inside my head. Blood seemed to rush backward through my body, my vision burning red with rage. The urge to scream, to call them parasites, to shove past them into my own house, surged through me like a tidal wave. But I swallowed it down, clenching my back teeth as hard as I could. If I lose control, I reminded myself, I will only be dismissed as a hysterical wife. They will use my anger against me. There was only one way to remove these foolish, brazen three. Effectively, legally, and permanently. I lowered my head. I let my shoulders slump. When I spoke, my voice was thin and small, like a wounded animal accepting defeat. All right, I whispered. I'll do as you say. The moment those words left my mouth, the three of them exchanged triumphant glances. Patricia's smile widened. Robert actually chuckled. Finally, she gets it, Patricia said. That was easy, Robert added. As my thoughts spiraled in confusion, one explanation surfaced. It's not his decision. It has to be his parent. Patricia had always been controlling. Robert had always enabled her. They must have poisoned his mind, speaking badly about me, manipulating him behind the scenes. They probably told him I was abandoning him for my career. They probably fed his insecurities about my salary. I made 3 times what he did. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how the gentle, loving man I knew could behave like this. He's not a monster, I told myself. He's just trapped. That lie kept me warm for another week. The next day, I couldn't put my phone down, even while working. I kept waiting for a message from Kevin, some sign of remorse, some apology. But the merciless silence finally made me understand. This was his clear rejection. Whether he was being controlled or had chosen to betray me himself, I no longer had the luxury of waiting. That evening, after the Paris office had emptied out, I called my trusted supervisor, James Whitmore. James was a senior partner, a gray-haired man in his 60s who had seen it all. He had mentored me for years, and more importantly, he trusted my judgment. "There's been a family emergency," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I'm very sorry, but I need to return to the United States immediately. I don't know for how long." Sensing the gravity in my voice, he replied without hesitation. "I can tell just from hearing you that this isn't something minor. You can explain the details later. Don't worry about the project. I'll handle the team and give them proper instructions. Focus on yourself. Go home." Back in my hotel room, I stuffed my belongings into my suitcase like a madwoman. Clothes, documents, my laptop, my toiletries, everything went in without folding or organizing. I boarded the earliest flight I could arrange that very night, a red-eye to JFK with a connecting flight to my hometown. He reached out to snatch my phone from my hand. I took a single step back and calmly dodged his arm. I had been taking self-defense classes for years, a habit from my days traveling alone for work. He was faster than me, but he was also sloppy, driven by rage instead of strategy. "Operator, can you hear me?" I said, my voice never wavering. "One of the perpetrators, my husband, is currently threatening me and attempting to interfere with this report. He is being extremely aggressive. Please send assistance immediately." That one calm sentence was the final blow. Kevin froze where he stood, as if turned to ice. His arm was still outstretched, his face twisted in a mask of fury and disbelief. On the other end of the line, I heard the operator say, "Understood. Officers are being dispatched immediately. Please ensure your own safety." "Thank you," I replied, and ended the call. "Are you insane, Hillary?" Kevin shouted. His face was red, his veins bulging in his neck. "Are you trying to destroy our relationship? Our family?" "Family?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You, the man who tried to throw me out of my own home and told me to rent an apartment, have the nerve to say that word? The ones who aren't sane here are you. Call them back and cancel it now," he yelled. "Are you really going to ruin our lives? Our marriage?" "It's too late. The report has been officially filed. This is no longer a personal matter. It's a legal one." I let his rage wash over me without flinching. I had spent years negotiating with hostile clients and aggressive competitors. Kevin's tantrum was nothing compared to a French boardroom full of angry executives. Patricia, who had been shrieking moments before, suddenly changed tactics. She approached me with a tearful expression, her voice wobbling with fake remorse. "Hillary, please, think about this. Kevin is just upset right now, that's all. We're family, aren't we? If this turns into a police matter, we won't be able to show our faces in society. Think of the scandal." "That's right," Robert added in a sympathetic tone I didn't believe for a second. "Let's all go inside and talk calmly. We admit we may have gone too far with the lot, so when the police arrive, we can just say it was a simple marital argument, a misunderstanding. No need for anyone to go to jail." On the surface, their words sounded conciliatory, but in truth, they were nothing more than a demand that I lie for their own self-preservation. Despite their claims of regret, what I saw in their eyes was pure fear, not remorse. Just fear that their plan was collapsing, and they were still firmly on their son's side. "The discussion is over," I said, staring straight at all 3 of them. "It ended the moment you tried to drive me out of my own home. And what you're asking for now isn't reconciliation. You're just trying to use me to erase your crime." All 3 fell silent. That was when it happened. In the distance, the faint wail of sirens broke through the heavy silence between us. The sound grew louder and louder, echoing off the suburban houses. As the sirens approached, the red fury drained from Kevin's face. Patricia turned a sickly shade of pale. Robert started sweating. 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house. 4 officers stepped out, 2 from each car. Leading them was an older officer with a calm, composed demeanor, clearly a seasoned veteran. His nameplate read Sergeant Miller. The living room walls had been repainted a cheap, unfamiliar beige, the color of old coffee with too much creamer. My beloved cream-colored sofa, the one I had saved for months to buy, was shoved into a corner and covered with stains. In its place sat a massive, hideous leather recliner that smelled like cigarette smoke. The hardwood floors were scratched. The carpet was stained in countless places, wine, grease, something that looked suspiciously like nail polish. The air was thick with the stale smell of beer, mixed with the lingering residue of someone else's life, someone else's body odor, someone else's neglect. I stood in the middle of my violated living room and let myself cry for exactly 60 seconds. Then I wiped my face, squared my shoulders, and turned to Lucy. I need a locksmith. 24-hour service. And tomorrow morning, I need the name of the best divorce attorney in the city. That night, I stayed at Lucy's house. I called a 24-hour locksmith and scheduled them to arrive at 7 the next morning. Then I slept for 10 hours, the deepest, most dreamless sleep I had had in months. The next day, clutching a new set of keys, I went straight to the city's most reputable law firm, Sterling, Chase and Associates. I was introduced to an attorney named Steve Anderson, a sharp-eyed man in his early 50s with a reputation for never losing a divorce case involving significant assets. He listened silently as I laid out the story, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. I placed all my meticulously prepared evidence on the table: a chronological account of events, a copy of the deed, sworn statements from neighbors, including Lucy, photographs of the destroyed garden, and the record of my final phone call with Kevin. The living room walls had been repainted a cheap, unfamiliar beige, the color of old coffee with too much creamer. My beloved cream-colored sofa, the one I had saved for months to buy, was shoved into a corner and covered with stains. In its place sat a massive, hideous leather recliner that smelled like cigarette smoke. The hardwood floors were scratched. The carpet was stained in countless places, wine, grease, something that looked suspiciously like nail polish. The air was thick with the stale smell of beer, mixed with the lingering residue of someone else's life, someone else's body odor, someone else's neglect. I stood in the middle of my violated living room and let myself cry for exactly 60 seconds. Then I wiped my face, squared my shoulders, and turned to Lucy. I need a locksmith. 24-hour service. And tomorrow morning, I need the name of the best divorce attorney in the city. That night, I stayed at Lucy's house. I called a 24-hour locksmith and scheduled them to arrive at 7 the next morning. Then I slept for 10 hours, the deepest, most dreamless sleep I had had in months. The next day, clutching a new set of keys, I went straight to the city's most reputable law firm, Sterling, Chase and Associates. I was introduced to an attorney named Steve Anderson, a sharp-eyed man in his early 50s with a reputation for never losing a divorce case involving significant assets. He listened silently as I laid out the story, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. I placed all my meticulously prepared evidence on the table: a chronological account of events, a copy of the deed, sworn statements from neighbors, including Lucy, photographs of the destroyed garden, and the record of my final phone call with Kevin. As my thoughts spiraled in confusion, one explanation surfaced. It's not his decision. It has to be his parent. Patricia had always been controlling. Robert had always enabled her. They must have poisoned his mind, speaking badly about me, manipulating him behind the scenes. They probably told him I was abandoning him for my career. They probably fed his insecurities about my salary. I made 3 times what he did. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how the gentle, loving man I knew could behave like this. He's not a monster, I told myself. He's just trapped. That lie kept me warm for another week. The next day, I couldn't put my phone down, even while working. I kept waiting for a message from Kevin, some sign of remorse, some apology. But the merciless silence finally made me understand. This was his clear rejection. Whether he was being controlled or had chosen to betray me himself, I no longer had the luxury of waiting. That evening, after the Paris office had emptied out, I called my trusted supervisor, James Whitmore. James was a senior partner, a gray-haired man in his 60s who had seen it all. He had mentored me for years, and more importantly, he trusted my judgment. "There's been a family emergency," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I'm very sorry, but I need to return to the United States immediately. I don't know for how long." Sensing the gravity in my voice, he replied without hesitation. "I can tell just from hearing you that this isn't something minor. You can explain the details later. Don't worry about the project. I'll handle the team and give them proper instructions. Focus on yourself. Go home." Back in my hotel room, I stuffed my belongings into my suitcase like a madwoman. Clothes, documents, my laptop, my toiletries, Everything went in without folding or organizing. I boarded the earliest flight I could arrange that very night, a red-eye to JFK with a connecting flight to my hometown. At that moment, I understood everything. Ah, I thought, I see it now. All his love had been a lie. That gentle gaze, those warm embraces, the promises of a future. All of it had been a grand performance, a long con designed to secure him a comfortable life funded by my labor. Before anger even had a chance to rise, a deep, inescapable emptiness spread through me. After his false testimony, Steve's skillful cross-examination began. He dismantled Kevin's lies piece by piece, exposing contradictions and inconsistencies. "Were you jealous because Hillary earns more than you?" Steve asked. "No," Kevin said, but his face flushed. "Did you boast about her house to your friends as if it were proof of your own success?" Kevin shifted in his seat. That's not relevant. Answer the question, please." "Yes," Kevin muttered. "Maybe, but that's normal in a marriage." "Normal?" Steve raised an eyebrow. "Is it also normal to change the locks on a house you don't own?" Hit squarely by the truth, Kevin finally lost his temper. "As a wife, isn't it her duty to support her husband's family?" he shouted. "What's wrong with my parents taking a little break? She earns enough money. It's her duty as a wife to tolerate that." The courtroom went silent. At that moment, Kevin had dug his own grave. His words revealed to everyone, the judge, the jury, the gallery, that he saw his wife not as an equal partner, but merely as a tool to satisfy his desire. The judge regarded him with a look that was neither contempt nor pity. Then she quietly struck the gavel. Hearing that sound, I quietly felt certain of my victory in this battle. On the day of the ruling, I sat alone in the courtroom. Steve was beside me, but I had told Lucy to stay home. "I'll call you when it's over," I had said. This was my final ritual, to put things in order with my own hands, without a support network to lean on. The solemn voice of the judge echoed through the silent courtroom. "I will now deliver the verdict." I straightened my back and looked straight ahead. "First, this court accepts the divorce petition filed by plaintiff Hillary and permits legal proceedings for divorce under the conditions to be determined hereafter." The judge cast a sharp glance at Kevin in the defendant's seat. He looked small, deflated, like a balloon with all the air let out. "Next, regarding the disputed property, based on the submitted evidence, it is fully recognized that the property was purchased by plaintiff Hillary with personal assets accumulated prior to marriage. Therefore, it is not subject to division, and ownership remains entirely with plaintiff Hillary. My castle was legally and completely protected. I could feel my heartbeat strong and powerful. The ruling continued. Defendant Kevin is ordered to pay plaintiff Hillary as follows. First, $28,000 for physical damages caused by unlawful occupation. This includes the cost of changing locks, thorough cleaning of the entire house by professionals, and full restoration of the damaged garden. I nodded. That would cover the rose bushes. Second, $150,000 in compensation for severe emotional distress caused by the defendant's malicious actions. The total payment is $178,000. The judge's voice grew harder. The defendant's actions not only fundamentally betrayed trust in the marriage but also severely violated the property rights and dignity of an individual. They must be condemned as extremely self-centered and malicious. This court finds no mitigating circumstances. $178,000. More than I had expected. I was deeply and quietly satisfied that the judge had publicly condemned their actions as malicious and self-centered, and had formally acknowledged the suffering I had endured. As the court was adjourned and people began moving about, I finally looked at the defendant's seat. Kevin sat dazed, as if his soul had left his body. His mouth hung slightly open. His eyes were empty. His parents sat beside him, Patricia covering her face with her hands and weeping, Robert staring blankly at the wall. I knew their tears were not born of remorse. They were crying for themselves. For the comfortable life they had stolen and lost. For the son who had ruined everything. A few weeks later, I received a call from Steve with administrative details about the compensation payment. After we finished discussing the logistics, he paused. "I thought you might want to know," he said carefully, "how they're doing." I hesitated. Did I want to know? Part of me wanted to wash my hands of them forever. But another part, the curious, strategic part that had gotten me through this whole nightmare, wanted to hear the ending. "Go ahead," I said. Due to their arrest for unlawful entry and the ensuing legal proceedings, Kevin's social credibility is completely destroyed. He lost his real estate license. He's unemployable in any client-facing role. The burden of paying the compensation has fallen heavily on him. His parents have no money to contribute, of course. And even the few friends who helped cover his bail have abandoned him. They're living in a cheap apartment on the other side of town. According to my investigator, they spend every day shouting at each other, "It's your fault." Steve paused. It's not a happy ending for them, Hillary. But it is a just one. I thought about that for a moment. Thank you for telling me, I said. I hung up the phone and looked around my home. The walls had been repainted, a warm, soft cream that I had chosen myself. The floors had been refinished. The garden had been replanted, not with roses this time, but with native wildflowers that would bloom in the spring. On the mantelpiece, next to a photograph of Lucy and me laughing at a restaurant, sat the new set of keys. They were mine. Only mine. The divorce would still take some time due to the state-mandated waiting period. But for me, my new life had already begun. I was no longer Hillary, Kevin's wife. I was Hillary, the woman who had stood her ground, called the police, and taken back what was hers. And that, I decided, was the best ending of all.